They laughed when he said he was representing his cousin in court. 20 minutes later, nobody was laughing. The moment 17-year-old Jalen Prescott stepped into courtroom 2B at the Maricopa County Courthouse, Judge Harold Wexler didn't waste a second. "Take that hood off, son. This isn't a rap video," he snapped. Jalen didn't react. He pulled the hood down, revealing short, twisted hair and eyes that didn't blink much. He looked calm, focused. His clothes were simple: worn hoodie, black jeans, and sneakers with frayed laces. If you didn't know better, you'd think he was there for skipping class. But he wasn't. He walked straight to the plaintiff's table, dropped his backpack beside the chair, and sat like it was routine. On the other side of the courtroom sat the defense attorney, mid-40s, expensive suit, glasses that never slipped, and a face full of smug confidence, the kind that said, "This won't take long." Judge Wexler leaned forward, squinting. "Are you lost, Mr. Prescott?" Jalen answered without hesitation. "Jalen Prescott, here to represent my cousin, Ms. Tiana Rowe, in case 2023 CV7. The courtroom quieted. A few whispers died out. Wexler's tone sharpened. "You're what now?" "I'm her legal representative. Pro se appointment. All documents were submitted and approved last Friday." He pulled a file from his backpack, neatly clipped and organized, and handed it to the bailiff, who reluctantly brought it to the judge. Wexler flipped through the papers. His signature was there. Everything checked out. But Wexler wasn't ready to let it go. "We're doing circus acts now," he muttered. "Watch a few episodes of Law and Order, and suddenly you think you're Clarence Darrow. Fine, let's see what the kid can do." Laughter rippled through the room again, but Jalen didn't react. He opened his file, flipped through the pages, and began writing something on a yellow notepad. The defense attorney stood. "Your Honor, we're prepared to proceed, but we reserve the right to file for dismissal based on the plaintiff's decision to be represented by a minor." Wexler waved him off. "He wants the spotlight? Let's see if he can handle the heat." Then, for the first time, Jalen looked up, calm, clear, and unshaken. "Before we proceed, Your Honor, can I confirm that the opposing counsel has submitted all documentation tied to the February 8th lease violation? Emails, photos, time-stamped notices." The room froze. Wexler blinked. The defense attorney stammered, "Those weren't included in the original discovery. Due to timing, they were omitted." Jalen didn't raise his voice. Despite being central to the case, Wexler stared at the lawyer, frowning. 5-minute recess. "Produce the documents, and next time, don't cut corners." Jalen nodded once, made another note, and leaned back. He hadn't even begun presenting his case, but the courtroom's energy had already shifted. The silence wasn't boredom anymore. It was curiosity. Jalen hadn't come to play, and Judge Wexler wasn't done testing him. Jalen had grown up in South Phoenix, just 10 blocks from the same rundown apartment complex his cousin was being evicted from. It wasn't the kind of place where people talked about civil court, but his mom did. Her name was Patrice. Front desk at a pediatric clinic for 16 years. Never missed a shift. Knew how to stretch a dollar, pay rent 3 days early, and keep the lights on. His father? Gone when Jalen was 5, left behind a half-packed suitcase and a pile of bills. Jalen didn't dwell on it. He just learned early. No one was coming to save them. He wasn't the loud kid in school. He sat in the back, hoodie up, scribbling in the margins while teachers assumed he wasn't listening. He was, just not to them. When his uncle got arrested for a parking ticket that spiraled into a resisting charge, something changed. Jalen started reading articles, court transcripts, city codes, Supreme Court opinions. At first, it was anger, then interest, then obsession. By 15, he could quote Arizona tenant laws from memory. At 16, he wrote mock responses to eviction notices for fun. While other kids were at the mall or sneaking into parties, Jalen was watching court proceedings online. And now, At 17, he was about to cross-examine a seasoned attorney in open court, and no one was laughing anymore. He used to spend hours watching court hearings online, breaking them down like a coach studies game tape. Nobody took it seriously, except his mom. One night, while folding laundry, she looked at him and said, "You'd make a damn good lawyer," then went back to sorting socks like she hadn't just changed his life. It all got real the day his cousin Tiana came home from a double shift at the hospital, in tears, holding an eviction notice, a noise complaint, except she wasn't even home when it happened. Jalen smelled something off immediately. And when Tiana said she couldn't afford a lawyer, he didn't flinch. He stepped in, not out of pride, but out of purpose. He pulled records, dug into timestamps, tracked down neighbors. 2 of them swore they'd overheard the property manager say he wanted Section 8 gone by summer. That was enough for Jalen. He knew the law. In Arizona, with the right paperwork, a person could represent a family member in civil court. So he did. Filed it, got it notarized, waited for the court date. Jalen had no car, no license, no social media, but he had a binder full of facts and a quiet fire in his chest. People underestimated him because he wasn't loud, but that's what made his silence echo louder when he left the room. Tiana was 24, worked nights at St. Joseph's, and raised her little brother, Kalen, who had severe asthma. She kept her apartment clean, paid rent early, never made noise. But after a new property management company took over, everything changed. Letters about minor rule violations, surprise inspections, complaints from neighbors who were never home. Then came that bogus February 8th report, loud music, yelling, possible fighting. Except Tiana had clocked in at 6:45 p.m. and didn't leave the hospital until the next morning. Kalen had slept at a friend's. The apartment had been empty. When she tried to explain, the manager shrugged. It's not personal. But it was, because 2 other single-parent black families in the building had already been pushed out the same way. No hearing, no appeal. Just pressure and paperwork. When Tiana texted Jalen, "They're trying to evict me," he left class mid-lecture, took the city bus to her apartment, and by dinner, they were sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out like chess pieces. Jalen didn't say much. He just listened, took notes, opened his laptop, and started building a case. Roe v. Holstead, MGMT. He found the complaint, had no signature, no witness, no evidence. But what it did have was an email chain about revitalizing the tenant profile. He even visited the neighbor supposedly behind the complaint, Ms. Cheney, apartment 3B. She looked at him like he was speaking a different language. "I don't know that girl. Didn't hear nothing. Didn't report nothing." That was the final piece. Jalen typed up a formal challenge to the violation and filed it under Tiana's name. When the property manager ignored it, Jalen filed a civil complaint for wrongful eviction. A week later, they had a court date. When he walked into the courthouse with legal approval to represent her, the clerk triple-checked his ID. It was valid, but paperwork doesn't erase bias. The moment they stepped into courtroom 2B, the air changed. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not dressed like that. Not that age. Not that confident. But Jalen hadn't come to play the part. He came to show them what it looked like when you stop underestimating the quiet kid in the back of the class. Judge Wexler stacked the papers in front of him, glanced at the docket, and said dryly, "Let's keep this short. We've got 3 more cases today." But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jalen Prescott was just getting started. Judge Wexler looked exhausted. Not from the case. From Jalen. He sighed, rolled his pen between his fingers like the whole thing was a waste of time. "Mr. Prescott, you may proceed. Try not to turn this into a TED Talk." Jalen stood up. No script, just a yellow notepad and a pen behind his ear. "Thank you, Your Honor," he began, steady. Before I begin, I'd like to address something, the idea that I'm only here as a novelty. Objection, the defense attorney cut in. Is this a statement or a speech? Jalen didn't raise his voice. It's context. I'll move on. He walked to the center of the courtroom, looked around, then fixed his eyes on the judge. This isn't about noise. It's about power. My cousin, Tiana Rowe, is being pushed out of her home, not for anything she did, but because she doesn't fit the image this new management wants. She was accused of violating her lease while she was 45 minutes away, working the night shift at St. Joseph's. No evidence, no witness, just a typed-up complaint. He paused. We're not asking for pity, just the truth. The courtroom went still. Even the benches creaked quieter. Wexler narrowed his eyes. And you've got proof? Jalen reached into his backpack and handed a tabbed binder to the bailiff. Inside, time cards from the hospital, a signed denial from the neighbor supposedly behind the complaint, and printed notices showing a pattern of one-sided enforcement in the building. One section even included an internal email, legally obtained through a tenant's complaint, showing management discussing plans to update the tenant profile. Wexler flipped through it, unimpressed. You know evidence doesn't win cases by itself. Jalen didn't flinch. Yes, Your Honor, but sometimes facts speak louder than sarcasm. Someone in the gallery coughed, covering a laugh. Wexler leaned back in his chair. He didn't say it, but his expression shifted. For the first time, he wasn't just tolerating the kid, he was paying attention. You think you're clever? Wexler asked. No, sir, Jalen replied. I think my cousin deserves stable housing, just like anyone else. The defense attorney jumped in again. Objection. He's grandstanding. Overruled, Wexler said flatly. He still wasn't a fan, but now he was listening. Jalen pressed on, calm and clear. Under ARS per R 33, 11367, tenants have the right to challenge baseless or retaliatory evictions. Ms. Ra was given no hearing, no chance to respond, and never saw the original complaint. Her rights were ignored over something that never happened. His voice didn't rise. He wasn't performing. He was telling the truth. The defense tried to pivot, bringing up unrelated complaints about Tiana's behavior. Jalen answered each one with documentation. Vague, unconfirmed, contradicted. Nothing held up. Wexler looked down at the binder again. You came prepared, he muttered, more to himself than to the room. Jalen didn't nod, didn't smile. He wasn't there for approval. He just stood there, hands folded. Because the hardest part wasn't building a case. It was walking into a room designed to doubt you and holding your ground anyway. People weren't laughing anymore. They were leaning in. Then Jalen flipped to the back of his binder. I'd like to call my first witness, Ms. Cheney from apartment 3B. Wexler blinked. You brought a witness? Yes, Your Honor. She's present and willing to testify. From the gallery, an older woman with a walker stood slowly. Jalen offered his arm and helped her to the front. Once seated and sworn in, he asked, Ms. Cheney, did you file a noise complaint against Ms. Tiana Rowe on February 8th? Absolutely not, she said clearly. Were you ever asked to? Not directly, but the manager came by asking questions about the younger tenants, said he wanted to clean things up. Have you ever seen Ms. Rowe cause any disturbance? Never. That girl works harder than anyone in the building. Were you ever told a complaint was filed in your name? No. First I heard of it was from this young man. Jalen nodded. No further questions. The defense attorney looked ready to respond, but Wexler raised a hand. No need. Let her rest. The room stayed silent as the bailiff helped Ms. Cheney back to her seat. Jalen turned back to the judge. We also have time-stamped footage from St. Joseph's Hospital showing Ms. Rowe entering at 6:45 p.m. and exiting at 7:15 a.m. Her supervisor submitted a signed statement confirming her shift. He slid a USB drive across the table, The projector blinked to life. On screen, a security hallway. Tiana, in scrubs, badge visible, walking in. The next clip, her leaving 12 hours later. Hair messy, shoulders low, clearly exhausted. And suddenly, the courtroom didn't feel like a test anymore. It felt like a turning point. Exhaustion was written all over Tiana's face. The courtroom watched as the final seconds of grainy hospital footage played on the screen. Her shoulders slumped, scrubs wrinkled, hair messy after a 12-hour shift. Not dramatic, just real. Judge Wexler tapped his pen slowly on the desk, staring ahead in silence. The defense attorney, arms crossed, said nothing. His confidence had vanished. The screen went dark. The only sound in the room was the soft whir of the projector powering down. Then Wexler turned to Jalen. His voice, tired but clear. "Mr. Prescott, you've made your point." Jalen didn't move, didn't exhale. He stood perfectly still and said, "There's one more thing." He reached into his pocket and unfolded a letter. The bailiff took it and handed it to the judge. It was a signed statement from Maria Estes, a former tenant, single mother who had moved out 2 months earlier after receiving 3 unexplained lease violations. The letter described the intimidation, the fear, the quiet pressure, and a direct quote from the property manager: "It's easier for everybody if you just leave." Wexler read every word, his lips pressed together into a hard, silent line. When he finally looked up, something had changed. His tone was more deliberate. "I've sat on this bench for 19 years, he said slowly, "and I've never seen a kid walk into my courtroom with this level of composure, this degree of preparation, and this much evidence, especially without a law degree." He turned to the defense attorney. "You've got a lot to answer for." Then back to Jalen. "Your case is compelling. More than that, it's airtight." Jalen didn't flinch, didn't smile. He simply nodded and said, "Thank you, Your Honor." Because for him, this wasn't about recognition. It was about pushing through a system that didn't want him there, and standing his ground anyway. Nobody applauded. No one stood up. This wasn't a movie, but the room had shifted. The atmosphere, once filled with doubt and amusement, had been replaced by something else. Even the court reporter paused to glance at Jalen, and for the first time, there was respect in her eyes. Finally, Mr. Lell, the defense attorney, stood up. The folder in his hand seemed thinner now. His voice, once smooth, now strained. "Your Honor, we'd like to request a short recess to review this new material." Wexler didn't miss a beat. "You've had weeks. The footage is time-stamped. The letter is signed. The witness list was in the case summary." He tapped the bench once. "Motion denied. Let's proceed." Lyle returned to his table like a man walking into wind. He flipped pages with hands that weren't as steady as they'd been that morning. Then he tried again, pushing for dismissal on procedural grounds. But Wexler shut him down. "Procedural irregularities?" he said, arching a brow. "Like failing to provide lease logs when they were requested by the court?" Silence. Jalen glanced at Tiana. She sat quietly, her hands tightly clasped in her lap, her leg bouncing slightly under the table, her expression unreadable. Jalen leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" She gave him a small nod, almost invisible, but enough. Back at the bench, Wexler looked straight ahead. "Let's be honest," he said. "This case wasn't supposed to be real. Not in your mind, Mr. Lell. If I'm being honest, not even in mine." The gallery was silent. Even the air felt still. "You expected to walk in, bluff your way through, and be done in 15 minutes, Wexler continued. "But this young man has done more work than some of the third-year associates I've seen argue in this courtroom." Jalen didn't respond, not out of pride, because he knew it still wasn't over. "I'd like to call the building manager," he said. Lell's voice cracked. "Objection! He wasn't." "He was subpoenaed," Jalen said, calm and prepared. He responded via email. The court has a copy of the confirmation. He flipped to the exact page in the binder and slid it forward. Wexler took the sheet, reviewed it, and gave a single nod. "He's in the hallway. Bring him in." The door opened, and Phil Hayworth walked in. Late 30s, clipboard in hand, a look on his face like he'd rather be anywhere else. He took the oath with a sigh and folded his arms as he sat. Jalen approached. "Mr. Hayworth, can you explain why Ms. Rowe was issued a lease violation for a complaint that cannot be traced to any resident?" "I had a report," Hayworth answered flatly. "From whom?" "I don't remember the name. It was written down." "And where is it now?" "I don't have it anymore. It might have gotten lost." Jalen nodded slowly. "So just to be clear, you filed a lease violation based on an anonymous claim, with no supporting documentation?" Phil looked to the judge, visibly uncomfortable. "Yes." Jalen opened the binder and pulled out a printed email. "Did you send this message to your regional manager on February 10th? Quote, we're going to start removing the problematic ones, starting with 2C. They won't fight it." Phil's eyes widened. That was taken out of context. Jalen didn't blink. "What's the context where it's acceptable to refer to tenants as problems?" Silence. "Do you consider working-class tenants a problem, Mr. Hayworth?" Phil looked like he wanted to disappear. Wexler didn't move, didn't even blink. "No further questions." Phil was dismissed. As he walked back past the gallery, several people shook their heads. Ms. Cheney stared at the floor. Jalen returned to the plaintiff's table and sat down. This time, his jaw was clenched. Not from nerves, but from everything he'd been holding in. The long nights, the pages of case law, the doubt, the frustration of being underestimated again and again. He didn't let it out in anger. He let it out in facts. Because even when truth is on your side, justice isn't automatic. It takes more than evidence. It takes someone who's willing to make the room uncomfortable and stay standing until it changes. For a full 10 seconds, no one in the courtroom spoke. Not a breath, not a shuffle, just stillness. Judge Wexler sat with his chin resting on one hand, his glasses slipping down his nose, staring at the space in front of him like the courtroom had changed shape when he wasn't looking. And maybe it had. Maybe the walls really had shifted, not physically, but morally. The foundation of assumptions he brought in that morning didn't feel solid anymore. Jalen didn't speak either. He didn't need to. He stayed seated at the plaintiff's table, not out of fatigue, but because standing wasn't necessary anymore. He had said everything that needed saying. Tiana leaned in and whispered, "What happens now?" Jalen didn't answer immediately. He just looked at the judge, waiting. Finally, Wexler sat up straight and cleared his throat. "This court finds the complaint issued against Ms. Tiana Rowe to be without merit," he said, voice steady. The eviction process was initiated without sufficient evidence, with procedural inconsistencies, and with what this court can only describe as a troubling pattern of selective enforcement. The words landed heavy, not just because they signaled victory, but because they were real, official, spoken aloud, documented, entered into public record. For once, the truth wasn't hidden in a folder. It was recognized by the system itself. Wexler wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he said, "this court recommends the matter be reviewed by the appropriate housing authority for potential violations of the Arizona Fair Housing Act." The defense attorney, Mr. Lell, tried to jump in. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not." Wexler cut him off, not even looking in his direction. "You had your chance." Then he turned back to Jalen. His posture shifted, still firm, still formal, but now there was a weight in his words, a pause that meant something more than legal obligation. "Mr. Prescott," he said slowly, "I owe you an apology." Jalen tilted his head. just slightly. When you walked into this courtroom, I dismissed you. I saw a hoodie. I saw a teenager. I didn't see an advocate. That was my mistake. Somewhere in the gallery, someone murmured, "About time." Wexler didn't react. He wasn't trying to win back the room. He was just telling the truth. You've demonstrated extraordinary skill, legal knowledge, and self-control. You defended your cousin with dignity. You navigated complex legal procedures with clarity. And you maintained composure that many adults in this room would have lost hours ago. Jalen gave a small nod. "I appreciate that," he said softly. Wexler looked down at his notes, then back up. "This court session is adjourned." The gavel struck once. It was over. No cheering, no applause, just silence, the kind that meant something had shifted. Tiana finally exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Her shoulders dropped. She turned to Jalen, eyes full, but no tears. "You did it," she said. Jalen didn't smile. He just stood up, closed his binder, and slid it back into his backpack, like it was any other Tuesday. No fist pump, no moment of glory. On his way out, the court clerk tapped his shoulder gently. "Hey," she said, "you ever think about taking the bar someday? You've got something." Jalen gave her that same steady look he'd given everyone all day. "Maybe, if they let me." Outside the courthouse, the sun had come out. The air felt warmer than when they'd walked in. People passed by, unaware of what had just happened inside. Jalen and Tiana sat on the bench near the bus stop, the same one where they'd waited for nearly an hour last week to file paperwork no one thought would matter. Tiana nudged him with her shoulder. "Seriously?" "Thank you." He nodded, eyes on the traffic. A car pulled up and idled by the curb. "Just didn't want to see you get pushed out for no reason." She looked at him. "But how did you even learn all this?" Jalen stared down at the zipper on his backpack, fingers tracing the fabric. "I had to," he said. "Nobody else was going to do it." Tiana didn't say anything. She just leaned back, letting the clouds slide across the sun. Jalen finally cracked a smile. Not wide, but real. "You hungry?" "I'm starving." "I got $20. "Then you're buying." They laughed. Not loud, but loud enough to carry, loud enough to matter. Because in a system that rarely listens, sometimes the voice that breaks through isn't the one that shouts. It's the one that stands quietly, backed by truth, and refuses to back down. Jalen Prescott didn't walk into that courtroom dressed like anyone's idea of a lawyer. But he walked out with something more valuable than validation. He walked out with proof. Proof that knowledge beats perception. That preparation beats assumption. That justice doesn't belong to people in suits. It belongs to anyone brave enough to speak when it counts. Judge Wexler saw it. The courtroom saw it. And if we're paying attention, we should see it too. Because every neighborhood has a Jalen. Some quiet kid who watches more than he speaks. Who reads, who remembers, who doesn't wait for permission to be heard. The world keeps telling kids like him to sit down, to stay in their place, to wait their turn. But what if they didn't? What if we actually made space for voices like Jalen's before they had to fight their way in? If this story moved you, even a little, share it. Talk about it. Ask yourself, who in your own life gets overlooked? And if you're the one being underestimated, stay sharp, stay ready, speak up when it matters. They'll hear you eventually.